I want to talk a little bit about your experience as a teacher
hmm
and your firsthand experience with the terrors of the education system, because I know that looking back on my school years, that was like torture.
Yeah.
Just going through those years of indoctrination and just horrible memories of school and trying to learn this stuff, but not understanding it because it didn't make sense. History didn't make sense. And, dealing with people who were bullies because you weren't going along with the norm and you didn't fit into the system. So, yeah, school was like a torture chamber. So, what is your experience
Absolutely.
like?
Mine was very similar to that. I think everybody, especially people who are awake now, had that experience, where like, what is this weird system of control and like perversion and
Yeah.
arbitrary power? Like, why is that person in charge of me? That person is clearly unwell. We all had those teachers who you were like, you're not even okay at all. Why are you here trying to pretend like you can help children do anything? Like,
Right.
this is ridiculous. And then even worse are the teachers who, kind of like that dentist and kind of like other assholes enjoy this power and abusing it and misusing it. And some to really dark degrees that people have experienced, and some even to just that light degree where they just like pick on certain kids. And you're like, what are you, like 10 years old still? Like, this is
Right.
ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Um, but we also, I think, have all had the experience of good teachers who changed our lives and uplifted us and made us remember that there is actually something cool going on in the world or something interesting that we
Yes,
can
you're
think
right.
about, right? And those teachers really changed the lives of me and many of my friends. We were all kind of impoverished, fucked up kids, and
Yeah, and thank goodness they had those teachers because I don't know if, kids would make it through.
exactly, exactly. And that was my understanding back then. And I also had this understanding, even middle school and high school, that like I was going to have to pick a job at some point, and I couldn't do a job that, in my opinion or feeling, hurt anyone. And I had to do a job that, in my opinion, helped people. And there was very few of those that I could find, right? I'm like, well, police really fuck people up a lot. Like, I guess I could be a nurse, but I don't like body fluids or wiping people's butts. And so I guess I have to be a teacher. But then the more I saw like these teachers who could be good, I was like, that is it. Because then I can at least not harm, and then I can be a teacher that hopefully will help some kids get through this brutal torture that is the education system. And so that's why I very early actually decided to be a teacher and went on to become a teacher.
So, what was your experience like firsthand as a teacher? I mean, when did you start seeing that it was just basically a tool to indoctrinate kids to become good little slaves?
I mean, I knew that from childhood, really. I mean, growing up, like that,
Yeah.
that's what my dad did for me too, is be like, look at this. I came home one day, I had this memory come back not that long ago, but I came home one day and I was singing It's a Grand Old Flag, because they had taught us that in school. And he was like, what the hell is this bullshit? Like, who taught my kid this song? You are not a patriotic little slave. Like, he was pissed. And he was mad at school, and he was like, you're not going to be in this class anymore. And I was devastated because I was like, well, I don't even care what the song means. I just like singing with people. Like, I'm not going to like become a patriotic person just because of this song. So he actually ended up letting me like sing the song, and it was okay because he knew
So,
I
coming from
understood.
that
But
type of family, like how
yeah,
did you interact, and how did it interact with you, the whole system of it?
I really was empowered to resist a lot of the bullshit by my family and by those types of understandings. And so I was commonly the person in class who was like, yeah, but that's not even true. Look at this other source that says like this, or like, hey, if you're going to cry in class, maybe you shouldn't come in this day. Like, it's not really good for us. Like, I was kind of, there was a time where my teacher was gone from a math class, and we had this sub that was worthless, but we had a test coming up. We knew for sure we were going to have to take it whether our sub was worthless or not. So I just like got up and started teaching the class the things we were supposed to be learning. So like I just was like already the teacher before I ever became a teacher, really. But I always felt, becoming a teacher and then teaching, that I was like sneaking in this fire. I actually have this picture that I found of like a person like hiding this fire and like sneaking it in somewhere. And I'm like, that's exactly what I feel like I've been tasked to do and have done in teaching. And I did it for as long as I could. 14 years was my limit. And I finally was like, I can't take this. The system is constantly attacking anyone who doesn't fall in line, just like those bullies did when we were kids. The system is doing that constantly in a million different ways. And for a long time, I was like, I don't care. I'm on this like sacred mission. Like, I'm good and my kids love me and I don't really care about my principals or some of my coworkers who are awful douchebags, and it's fine, you know. But eventually it's like, it's not fine anymore. Actually, this is wearing me down. It's like stealing my energy, my will to live. And so I should probably stop. To the sadness of, you know, I felt like I was abandoning all those kids who I feel like need somebody who is not an asshole to help them see the world better, you know.
Well, where do you see our education system going now? I mean, especially post COVID here. We've got everything seems to be going online more or less. It was on a fast track to do that during this whole COVID thing, but now we've got a mix of, you know, should we wear a mask? Should we not? Should we get our kids vaccinated to go to school? And it seems like a whole new world from whenever I was going to school, even though I was, you know, highly indoctrinated myself in the 80s and 90s. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on, you know, our modern system and where it's going? Do you see any hope for it?
Sadly, not really. There's always going to be, you know, especially because of the spiritual truth of reality, there's always going to be a way for people to get through anything if that's their intention and will. But in general, this is getting even sicker and more strict and destructive than it ever has been. And it's, you know, it took up until like 2 years before I left, and I left about 2 years ago. So maybe 4 years ago, before my students started really shocking me in their inability and you know, lack of motivation. So they both were incapable of thinking very clearly or asking questions, and they also had no desire to do so. And how much we had turned from, you know, because I feel like all of us, most of us in our age group and before and after us, have this experience that like some of us just were curious, and even in this system it didn't really kill that in us, and we were able to find ways to like let that out and find access to it. And you know, it just has slowly turned into this. We've created these beings that have very little chance of being connected to something like inside of themselves that is actually them, and not all of this shit coming from outside through these electronic media means and all of these things that are like telling them who they are instead of developing who they are, instead of them developing and bringing out who they are. So it really is, I really like got to the point where I looked at my class and I was like, wow, I'm unfortunately and really against my own optimism looking at just a room full of like mindless drones who have no will to come out of dronehood.
Yeah. Now, you said 2 years ago was the final experience you had with these kids. Now, I find it fascinating that you mentioned that, because I always wonder what, you know, modern youth is like, especially in a school setting nowadays. Because I remember how it was in my day. But today it's hard to gauge. I'm not around kids at all, so I don't know. I'm wondering, what was your experience? Basically, you gave us a little taste of it, and I can see that. I can see how electronics and social media and everything that's happened and everything that's going on has indoctrinated kids to a level that I would probably be terrified by, honestly,
Yes.
just witnessing it myself. But tell us a little bit more. I mean, you said you're kind of basically teaching mindless zombies. When did this start kind of progressing into this?
And to those of my students who listen to some of my shows, and I'm not talking about you, obviously.
Not you guys, of
listening to
course.
this, yeah, you're still alive.
You guys are good.
But yeah, it's just more and more of them. But it really, like, there's a complacency and there's a enabling that we have started to instill from a very early age, and those have been the undoing of everything else. So students are taught that they should be given everything. It should be easy for them. It should be fun for them. And if it's not easy and fun and instantly attainable, it's not being done right. It's not their fault, and they're a victim. So I'm not joking that I would be like, hey, okay, pull out some paper and just write, 5 sentences about blah, blah. And people would be like, oh my God, why would you ask us to do this? Like, this is crazy. I'm like, we're in an English class and it's 5 sentences.
Jeez.
And they were like, not, and there's something in all students, and this is human nature. If that exists, it's not anyone's fault, actually, that we do resist work and we do resist like learning because it's uncomfortable and it takes effort and whatever. But that resistance was always like, oh man, do we have to? And some wheedling to see if you'd break and then doing it. But it got to the point where it was like, they were literally like, no, I'm not doing that. And I'm like,
I was just telling somebody today that this country's basically become like the failed parents of the kids who, like, they cry to get anything they want, and eventually they'll get it. They know they're going to get it as long as they keep whining and crying. And that's like today's youth, and not only the youth, but I see so many adults that think it's okay to behave that way just because the system has told them it's okay to behave that way over the past few years. And that's how you get your way.
Yeah. And the adults are reinforcing it. Here's a true story from my last year of teaching. I was teaching a graphic novel, which if anyone doesn't know, it's basically comics. So there's pictures and words and they're fun. They're awesome. I was teaching a graphic novel. I was teaching it by them. They all have the book in front of them and it's projected on the screen square by square so they know which one to hop to or whatever. And we read it together. Then I'd have a list of questions on the screen again. We'd go through them one by one and they had the questions on their desk and we would all answer them together, and all they had to do was write down anything close to the right answer. And 90% of them didn't or wouldn't, and then cried and went to the principal, and the principal came to me and told me to make the class easier.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine that?
That makes me just cringe. Wow.
I told her if I made it easier, we would be doing nothing. Do you want me to do nothing in the classroom? And she said, it doesn't matter what you do. You have to make it easier. These kids have to pass this class.
Oh,
that's
what we're dealing with.
That's what we're dealing with. And the fact that I resisted that and continued to do that super easy work was like the everyone in that school hated me and attacked me and all the shit was so crazy. I was like, I cannot do this anymore. I'm sorry, kids. You're on your own. I love you. I'll be over there. You can come find me when you're ready.
Yeah, and that's terrifying to me to imagine having to look out to a room full of kids that have been so indoctrinated and basically zombified that
and enabled.
And enabled, yes, of course, that nothing you do or say is going to be able to help that, because they're going to go right home back to that indoctrination. They're going to turn on the TV, snap back into it, put on their phone, start clicking away into it. So it's like, I see why you quit.
Yeah. Here's another, just for good measure. A student came to me and they were like so upset. They're like crying, or like, tears were in their eyes. Oh my God. I was like, what's wrong? Like, oh my God, my parents are such assholes. They kicked me out today. And I was like, wow, that's kind of intense. Like, what happened before that? Nothing happened before that. They just kicked me out. I was like, well, that's really unlikely. Like, something probably happened. He's like, well, I mean, I didn't make dinner for them, but I'm not their slave. And I was like, oh, do you have to cook every meal or whatever? He's like, no, I have never. And they asked me to, and they bought all the food, and then they left, and they told me if I didn't make it by the time they got back, because I had never made a meal for myself or them, that I was going to get kicked out. I was like, sounds like you had a really good warning and that it's a pretty fair ask. Like, how old are you? And he was like 19. I'm like, whoa. You're 19 and you've never made food for yourself or anyone else, and you're kicked out and you're shocked about that? And he's like, well, I don't have like a job. Where am I going to live? I'm like, whose fault is it you don't have a job? He's like, well, I can't get to a job. All the hours are outside of when the bus comes, and the bus doesn't even come to my house. I'd have to walk half a mile to get to the bus. I'm like, dude, half a mile walking to the bus is nothing. But also, where do you live? It's a tiny town. He shows me where he lives. I'm like, you live like 2 miles at the most from everything. Like, get a bicycle, you fuckhole. Like, what are you doing? You're 19. You have no job. You won't get one because you pretend you can't. And then you're upset that someone kicked you out for not doing any chores, it sounds like, or anything for yourself. Like, I would kick you out too. He's like, you're not very compassionate. I was like, dude, if this is not compassion, nothing is. Because if you don't learn to take care of yourself, you're always going to be a piece of shit that's just sucking off of like the teat of someone else. And that is not cool, dude.
Yeah, I wouldn't have the patience for that.
It
Wow.
was intense. But that was normal. That was the
Yeah.
normal view of what life should be like for those kids. I was like, this is never going to work out for anybody.
Yeah, my hope for the future, it just lessens more and more with every story like that I hear, and it's just
Yes.
it's pretty sad.
Well, and
Uh,
that watching the levels of that increase over the years was what really broke me. But let's also
Yeah.
remember that there are actually kids who are going to get through even that positively because they have good parents or because they just have good sense and they're self-directing. And so not everyone is going to be
Right.
that.
And
Those
I
are
know a
some
lot of people
extremes,
who
but-
are good parents and who are trying to keep their kids as unindoctrinated as possible, even if they have to homeschool them.
Yeah.
That may not be an option for some people, but as long as they just keep their heads above the water here,
Yeah.
it's
And
difficult.
talk to them.
Yeah.
Talk to them about everything and everything that you can, and just help them see different perspectives and try out new things, and it'll be okay. Yeah, homeschooling is my hope, actually. A lot of people have started homeschooling in the past year because of all this bullshit, and I would have too if I hadn't already been by that point. I would do anything I could to try and make that work, because it's just going to get more and more prison-like, and covering their ability to breathe by force. Vaccinations are going to be even more required, I'm sure. Like, it's not gonna get better anytime soon.